I'm not going to cover every single time LTT talks about Linux. However, we did cover the Linux challenge, so I think it makes logical sense to do the next direct follow-up to that challenge, and that is this one here. It's time to commit to Linux, but which one? Now, there are a few things that were said which I kinda disagree with, and a few things which I think need some additional context to really explain what is actually going on. So, let us go and take a look.
Do you, Joe Gamer, take Linux to be your lawfully wedded operating system, to have and to have—
I object! She's no operating system, she's a kernel!
Yep, that's me.
Okay, but jokes aside, there is a common misconception that Linux is an operating system when
It's time once again to bring out the copy pasta. I'd like to interject for a moment. What you're referring to as Linux is in fact GNU/Linux, or I've taken to calling it GNU plus Linux. Linux is not an operating system unto its— You've all heard the copy pasta before. If you've not, I will leave it linked down below. Yes, it is true that Linux is not an operating system if we're strictly talking about the Linux kernel project. But everyone knows what you're talking about. If you say the Linux operating system, it's one of those things which the only people that actually care about it are these like extreme hyper nerds that fixate on every tiny little detail.
in truth, it's just one part of a modern desktop operating system. Specifically, it is the kernel. The kernel is an important part. It's responsible for managing resources and communication between the operating system and your physical hardware, but you are going to need other key components. Thankfully, you don't need to worry about that though. Some fine gentleman or lady, probably with a severe caffeine dependency, already found everything you need, made sure it works together, and then bundled it for convenient distribution. Hence why we call Linux operating systems distributions, or distros for short.
Distro is actually a very interesting term. This is a bit of a side tangent, but we can't actually point to who and where the term was coined. We know what the first Linux distro was. That usually goes to MCC Interim Linux back in 1992. There was a thing called Bootroot. This was made by Linus Torvalds. This took a disk image and then paired it with a kernel and some additional tools. It's debatably a distro. It has a lot of the parts to consider to be a distro, but it required bootstrapping from an existing install, so I wouldn't call it one. MCC Interim Linux, that did all the bootstrapping itself. That is generally considered the starting point, but no one knows who defined the term. I think it's just something a lot of people considered as like a useful term around the same time, and nobody can really decide on where it was first said.
Distros? Plural, you say? I do. The beauty of open source is
The only one that matters is Arch. In come the comments.
that anyone with an idea is welcome to create their own flavor of Linux that they feel is best, which has resulted in a lot of choice for users. Some distributions prioritize cutting-edge features and performance, while others prefer to prioritize stability. Some of them aim to be intuitive for PC or Mac refugees, while others
I would actually steer clear of a lot of these projects that try to look like Windows, unless you know exactly what you're getting into. These are really cool projects, and I like them as a sort of theming endeavor, but as a user that is coming from Windows, if you go to something which is very similar looking to Windows, it's going to end up confusing you when things don't exactly work the way that Windows does. It's going to give you this sort of uncanny valley feeling where it's like Windows, but there's something off about it. My general recommendation is just go to something that is Linux. Know that you're dealing with something different. Understand the experience isn't going to be the same. Don't try to make it identical to Windows, because that is not going to happen. You are not on Windows. You are not on macOS. This is a different thing.
while others seek to create something entirely new.
I don't know if I'd call Hannah Montana Linux something new. Frankly, a lot of distros don't really need to exist. A lot of them are basically just the mainline distro. It's a Fedora, it's Debian, it's OpenSUSE, and then they make a couple of like minor cosmetic changes. realistically, a lot of these projects would be better served as a post-install script, because then you'd be able to easily just apply it to any other distro base. But if you want to be a distro, hey, be a distro. That's the freedom of open source.
Some are focused on what works best for developers, while others are laser focused on gamers, which is all great, but it can create a bit of choice paralysis, especially for new users. I mean, unless you're willing to test drive every distro, how can you know which one is the best? Well, conveniently, most Linux distributions support live booting, a way to try before you buy, running them directly off of a piece of removable media like a USB thumb drive.
This is not bad advice. I would also suggest trying it out in a virtual machine. If you have, I know a lot of people don't, but if you have some sort of secondary old machine, if you have a secondary drive that you're willing to just nuke over and over and over again, I do think trying it actually properly installed is going to give you the best possible experience. I understand a lot of people just don't have a secondary machine. Totally fair. Now, you can go and buy like an old laptop and do things like that, but understand, totally makes sense. Virtual machines also work. I think a lot of people, when it comes to the paralysis over distro choice, it's because they are focusing on criteria that they don't yet know how to evaluate. If I asked you the question, what is a better package manager? DNF, apt, Pacman, or anything else out there? If you're an experienced Linux user, you might have an answer. If you're new to Linux, maybe you can look at the options, but like you can't really evaluate what that means. Should you be concerned with a distro that makes use of snaps? Should you care about Flatpak? Should you care about any of these different packaging solutions? What about the kernel and whether they apply any patches to the kernel? Is that something you should care about? What do those patches do? Are those good patches? Are they bad patches? Do they improve your experience? Do they improve someone else's but not yours? These are questions which all can be answered, and at some point down the line, you will have a preference for what you want. But when you're first getting started, you don't even know where to begin with some of these questions. I think for a lot of people, it makes a lot more sense to focus on the desktop. Right now, I am making use of KDE Plasma, I'm making use of the Oxygen theme, and I've made some other various minor modifications. But if you've never used Linux before, and I sit you down in front of this machine, within a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, you can kind of get a vibe on whether or not this is the kind of thing you like. Do you like there being a menu down here? Do you like the customization that is there with Plasma? Do you like how extensive the settings menu is? You can then go to something like GNOME. Try that out. Do you like the fact that everything is built around this overview? You can go to something like a Hyperland. Do you like tiling? Do you like configuring things through a config file? You can go to Niri. Do you like the idea of scrolling? These are things where even if you don't have a deep understanding of the internals of the system, you can still make a educated guess, an educated sort of assessment on what you prefer.
Strongly recommend doing so. But if you're just a gamer who just wants to press start on your games and press play, that's still a fair bit of hassle. So if you don't feel
It really isn't. Like, I know people like to say it's a hassle, but it really isn't a hassle. It's a matter of, if you're on Arch, right? Like, Arch is the most complicated it's going to be. Installing 3 packages, and then you're good to go. If you're on something like a CashOS or a Bazide or anything else like that, it literally is just open Steam, click play, and assuming it's not an anti-cheat game, it actually does just work.
like doing that, we did the work for you, benchmarking many of the most popular gaming distributions to see just how much performance you can expect to gain from cutting edge.
I do like the way they blurred the graphs. You can immediately tell what the result is going to be. Don't worry, we'll get to that in just a moment.
To see just how much performance you can expect to gain from cutting-edge configurations, or in some cases, how much you might expect to lose from more conservative choices.
Ooh. Anyway, sorry, that was dumb. Moving on from that.
For our test, we settled on CashOS, Nobara Linux, Bazite, Pop! OS, Garuda, and Pica OS. Yes, I can already hear you typing. What about X?
But I will say, what about X? Because in every one of the Linux challenges that they've done, they had Mint as one of the things that someone was using. Mint is a really popular option. I don't know why Mint wouldn't be in this list. Yes, I know it is not a gaming distro, but I think there is this misnomer that you need a gaming distro to do gaming. It's kind of the same thing with a gaming chair, a gaming mouse, a gaming keyboard, gaming LEDs, a gaming motherboard. It doesn't need to be a gaming system to do gaming on it. Yes, there's going to be some modifications that might improve things like frame timing, maybe improve some FPS here and there, maybe have some pre-installed tools, but I do think it makes sense to include distros like Ubuntu, like Fedora, because if these distros are supposedly making improvements over those distros, you can't really make that assessment without doing that testing. Maybe Nabara is great, but does it actually improve anything over baseline Fedora? Maybe Pop! OS is great. Does it improve anything over baseline Ubuntu? Also, what a terrible pause spot this was.
Yes, I can already hear you typing. But what about X? But between picking these and testing them, the popular list changed, and by the time you're watching this, I'm sure it will have changed yet again.
It's probably roughly the same.
LTT Store is like this too. Yesterday, there was no true spec cables in stock, and now they're super popular and flying off the shelves. Get yours today, lttstore.com. Anyway, the exact distros are not the point here, but instead we want to educate newcomers about distros in general to hopefully remove some of that decision paralysis that often occurs. With that in mind.
Again, I think just focus on the desktop, but I guess there is people who are really worried about the distro. At the end of the day, if you find a distro that you think is better, you can just swap to it. Like, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Yes, it might be a little bit inconvenient. Yes, you might need to make sure you don't accidentally wipe your home drive, but it can be done.
And then here's a convenient little table that outlines some of the
Do note the testing was done back in May, so some things may have changed since then.
key differences between our selected flavors, or should I say, sub-flavors. All 6 of these distros are derived from one or another of the big distros that each come with their own pros and cons.
I do actually love this chart. I'll leave it linked down below. It's on the list of Linux distributions page. This is it's not even like every single distro out there, right? Like, because having every distro out there, well, firstly, there's a lot of distros no one even remembers exist. But secondly, it's already pretty big. But it does have MCC interim. And if you're curious about some of the early distros and the fact that things like Debian and Slackware both came off of another project called SLS, this is a great resource. I've shown it many times on this channel. I'll show it many more times into the future.
But the main one, from a general gamer's perspective, has gotta be third-party app support. Some app developers might only officially supply a .deb installation package. That's gonna work really well on Ubuntu or Debian, which are closely related. Other developers might opt for RPM files, which Fedora can use out of the box. None of this is gonna be a deal breaker, it just might be a little bit more work to get your favorite applications working.
Okay, if you're gonna use Linux, you need to immediately rein in this mindset. The idea that every application is going to be packaged by the developers of the application. Most things you install, most things you use, even if you try to install things that are packaged by the developers, are mainly going to be packaged by your distro maintainers. That is the function of the distro. That is the function of the distro maintainer. Now, there are places where you can find applications that have been packaged by the developers. You have things like FlatHub for Flatpaks. There is Snapcraft for snaps. Their website's really slow. Some application developers do provide an app image of their application, and then you sometimes have packages on the AUR that are officially made by, by the app developers. Sometimes, like for example with Minecraft, a third-party package made on the AUR by just some random developer is what they officially recommend. You have to get out of the mindset that the application developer provides the application. Going to the website is where you get the application. That is not the way we do things on Linux. Now, some people are pushing in that direction and some things are moving that way, but right now it is not the way things are being done.
As for your desktop environment, This dictates how the OS looks and feels. Most use some version of KDE Plasma, which
I wish I recorded my reaction the first time I heard that. I absolutely lost it laughing. But here is a dramatized recreation.
personally, I quite like. It feels very familiar to Windows users, while also bringing along some nice common sense improvements. The key things.
Whilst I like KDE, and as you saw, I'm running KDE right now, I don't think there's anything wrong if you vibe with GNOME or Trinity or Awesome WM or Budgie or Hyperland or XFC or Cinnamon. If those things are more up your alley, if those are things that, you know, they're not the gaming recommendation, they're not things that are being pushed by Valve. If that's what you vibe with, more power to you, keep it up, use what you want to use.
To watch out for then, in terms of performance, are the kernel version and the Mesa version. Newer kernels will bring.
I would also say the Proton version. The Proton version is incredibly important.
Better support for modern hardware and often better performance, while older kernels can offer the stability and security that only comes with long-term validation out in the field.
Yes and no. So very specific older kernel versions, not just older kernel versions. Right now, that is 6.18, 6.12, 6.6, 6.1, 5.15, and 5.10. These are known as the long-term support, the LTS kernels. Now take note of the third number at the end here. This is the minor releases made onto that branch. So what is done with an LTS release is no new features are added into 6.18 or 6.6 or 5.15. But sometimes, and frankly often, security issues are found and then fixes are applied to the new version, but also backported to the affected versions as well. And that is what each of these additional numbers is. If you're running an older kernel number and it is not one of these numbers, it's an out-of-date kernel. If you're running an older kernel version and it does not have the latest minor patch, it's an out-of-date kernel. Just because it is an older version does not mean it is more tested and more stable. If it is not up to date, it is still not up to date.
As for Mesa, it provides the Vulkan drivers that your graphics card uses.
Yes and no. This testing was done with an AMD card, and with Intel as well, that is true. However, like with many things on Linux, if we're talking about NVIDIA, it's a little bit more complicated. So with NVIDIA, when we're talking about the proprietary drivers, which is your like 580 drivers, 595, whatever the latest version happens to be, those make use of the proprietary drivers for the Vulkan support, along with pretty much everything else done with those drivers. There is one open source part, the kernel modules, but that's not what we're talking about here. However, there is an open source community-driven driver project. That is the Nuvo project, and this does make use of Mesa. For Vulkan support, it uses something known as NVK. For OpenGL support, it makes use of Zinc. This is running OpenGL on top of Vulkan, whole nother story there. Eventually, the goal is to have open source drivers that are as good or even better than the proprietary drivers to just not really justify having the proprietary drivers in the first place.
If you're running Windows games, Proton, which you might have heard of before, translates DirectX calls into Vulkan, and Mesa takes those calls and turns them into work the GPU can actually execute.
Again, for a third time, technically correct. DXVK is what converts those DirectX calls into Vulkan calls. Wine is what converts the Windows calls into Linux calls. If we're talking about the Steam frame, we'd also have FEX in the mix as well. This takes your x86 calls and converts them into ARM calls. Merge all of this together, you get Proton.
Basically, the newer your Mesa, the faster and smoother you can run Windows native games on your Linux machine. But
generally true, sometimes there are regressions, but also Proton version really, really matters. And frankly, I would say Proton version matters far more than any of this. This is something that you as the user, have easy control over. Changing your Mesa version that's difficult. You can do it, but it's not something most distros really encourage and really provide any means to do, so you're gonna have to go and compile it yourself, and have fun doing that is gonna take you a bit, and you're probably gonna break something. But Proton version, that directly affects the games which you're actually going to run, that can directly affect performance, and it is something which you are encouraged to directly mess with.
How much difference is there then? To find out, we threw together a test bench with a Sapphire Radeon 9060 XT and normalized.
Whilst LTT probably has access to countless of the top-end AMD cards, I guess what they're trying to do here is sort of just look at the average gamer, and I think that's fair.
On the same major version of Mesa, then ran 4 different games that each use very different game engines.
We don't specify if we're using the same version of Proton, so I'm assuming we are, but that's something which should be clear in the testing.
All of them are well-supported titles with a gold or better rating on ProtonDB. Starting with Cyberpunk, none of our distributions are outpacing each other, and the RX 9060 XT is performing about like we'd expect based on similar testing that the labs team ran in the past.
Surprising absolutely no one ever, Distro doesn't really change much. This is going to be the result you get in almost every single game, and a 2 FPS difference might sound like a lot, but this can definitely vary from test to test to test, depending on random background processes you have open, how hot it is today, various things like that. This is not statistically significant. Again though, Proton version really does matter. It has been directly demonstrated that the CashOS version of Proton does improve your latency. Now, that latency is going to be a very minor improvement, but that is something which still is something you can mess with, and we don't know what the version they're using here is.
Black Myth Wukong yields a similar result, with everybody neck and neck, except Garuda, who inexplicably managed a measurable lead in the 1% low.
Garuda throughout this entire testing is going to be a little bit weird.
And you might think, sure, that's only a 4% difference, but that's 17% more. And this is especially surprising given that in our first round of testing for this video, we actually found that Garuda lagged behind other popular distros.
We're not going to mention Pop! OS lagging behind here, though. I don't know why. We'll ignore Pop! OS, I guess.
More on that later. Moving on to Doom the Dark Ages. Once again,
this is another very typical result. This is what you're mostly going to be seeing.
Everyone's performing the same, but then in Forza Horizon 5, things get weird.
Yeah,
there
is actually not a good spot for me. Maybe up here? No, there is not a good spot for me to be in. I'm just going to move around.
Very consistent.
So yeah, we're seeing a actual big difference here.
From one distro to the next, and from one run to the next. But we observed wild variance in the 1% lows. This was the case across all distros. So here's the results, but it's worth noting that from one reboot to the next, we saw these positions change more than the rulebook for real F1 changes.
I don't think there's actually an F1 car in Forza. Anyway, I would be very curious to see what this would look like doing like 10 tests on a singular distro. If these jumped around from test to test to test, that implies to me that there is some sort of 1% low issue with the game, rather than there being a problem on Linux specifically. A single distro should not be varying that much.
From one reboot to the next, we saw these positions change more than the rulebook for real F1 changes. To be clear, I don't think this is going to be a long-term problem, and I expect Linux gaming to continue improving at a remarkable pace. It's just a great reminder that you want to always keep applying your updates. Even during the creation of this video, we encountered a great example of why that's so important.
Whilst that is true, again, I don't think it is a problem with Linux in this case. I think it actually is just a problem with Horizon 5 being a little bit weird. And considering considering what Horizon 6 was like at launch, and kind of still is now, does not surprise me.
In Labs' first round of testing in April, they normalized on the 25.0 major version of Mesa, and Garuda was underperforming across the board. This was pretty confusing, so to diagnose it, we reinstalled the system using the XFCE, only to get the same result again with both. After some more digging then, we found that the super customized, and heavy desktop environment was impacting performance. We modified our Garuda installation then to use the CachyOS kernel and XFCE desktop environment, and all of a sudden the performance matched our other distros when using the same Mesa version. Now,
I'm assuming he didn't write that section because he basically just said they swapped to the XFCE version and then swapped to XFCE. I'm assuming what he means is they swapped to the XFCE version and then tried out a cleaner version that doesn't have all of the like fancy ricing customization. And again, surprising no one ever on Linux, adding a bunch of bling onto your distro, adding a bunch of random background processes running slows down the system. We don't rice our Linux distros for speed. We do it for style. You don't paint your car red because it's gonna go faster. You paint it because you like the color red.
now we fast forward.
Sometimes that style costs a bit more than expected, but you know. However, it doesn't explain this next part.
Just a few weeks and many updates, and Garuda is not only performing alongside the other distros, but we found one case where it was even faster.
Which doesn't explain what's going on, right? Because it would still have all of those customizations going on. It wouldn't be like they just randomly removed all of it. My expectation here is that it's not actually the ricing that affected it. Maybe they had some like background process that was running, they removed the background process. I have a feeling that something else was going on in that testing. They had something running they didn't intend to have running. It was a weird boot. Sometimes things just behave weirdly. Computers are just magic thinking rocks. I don't understand them. I don't think it is just the fact they did some updates.
Goes to show, guys, the kernel, drivers, Proton, all of it is getting updates constantly, and you should let those updates roll. So, with that in mind then, we're ready for our recommendations. And surprise! They're gonna be CachyOS and Bazzite.
I don't personally like putting new users on an Arch-based system. However, if we are talking about a daily driver machine and the options are Cachy or Bazzite, I will be recommending Cachy. Mainly because Cachy is still a traditional Linux distro. You can take advantage of things like the Arch Linux Wiki. All of the resources we have on Linux are built around a traditional packaging model. If you go to Bazzite and you don't really know what to expect from an immutable system, which is what Bazzite is, much like SteamOS, there's going to be a lot of things you want to do, like installing kernel level changes that can't be done at all in the same way. Installing packages is a very different process, and if you don't understand this difference, you're just going to end up confusing yourself. As someone that understands Linux, as someone who has like a grounding for what Bazzite is, I think it's a totally good system. And I think it's totally fine if we're talking about like a media PC, a singular gaming PC that you're not just, daily driving for other things.
With that said, this isn't down to performance, and the others are all worth trying for gamers to see if you like some of their creature comforts. Maybe use a live boot drive like I suggested before. With one exception, actually. We're not going to recommend Garuda. While its performance is on par, we found that its out-of-the-box configuration of the Zen kernel and Dragonized desktop environment.
I'm not sure what they mean by out-of-the-box configuration of the Zen kernel. That's something that was never addressed in the rest of the video.
Could impact performance before, and while this can be rectified with Garuda, allowing kernel and desktop environment swapping without even arcane shell commands, it's still not the most beginner-friendly solution compared to some of the more turnkey distros that we highlighted today.
Personally, I don't recommend Garuda because I don't like the gaudy, bright gamer aesthetic. Frankly, I've never liked that style. It's just not my thing. If you like it, hey, more power to you. They do have the Capuchin version, which is far more subtle. But if I'm going to rice my system, I want to rice it the way that I like it. I don't really like the idea of just installing somebody else's rice.
By the way, something this video skims over is the installation and day-to-day experience aspect for these distros. And for that, I'd strongly recommend heading over to lttlabs.com to read the companion article. I'd also recommend checking out this segue to our sponsor.
Anyway, honestly, I don't expect LTT to get everything right from the very start, but I think it is good that they are covering Linux, that more and more normal people are just actually considering the fact that, hey, maybe this Linux thing is actually a thing you can use. Now, this is going to result in some, let's just call it cultural changes on Linux, where you're going to have a lot more people who don't have any sort of developer background, who don't want to make use of any of the resources we have, who have no idea how to report bugs, who have no idea how to get involved in these projects. So I'm curious to see, as Linux continues to grow, how that sort of changes things. But for now, we're in the good part. For now, we're in the part where people are talking about Linux, people are acknowledging the fact that this is a thing you can use, and things are good. For now. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well. If you have an LTT video, if you have someone else who's not LTT, maybe, who you think would be worth actually talking about the video, not just, oh, I switched to Linux and it's just like a boring switch to Linux video, but something where there's actually something to say about it, let me know about it. Anyway, yeah, like the video, go subscribe as well, click that hype button, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to LiberaPay, link in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and do you use Linux?
Something like this.